gone to Sparta. He now does it again, but he can't go to Athens. He's an outlaw in Athens with a price on his head. Any Spartan gets hold of him is going to kill him. Only one place to go, Persia.
And so the chameleon known as Alcibiades, condemned to death in both Athens and Sparta, changed colors again.
What sort of a character can go from one defecting from his own people to their arch enemy, then defect to another enemy? What kind of a person can do that?
Fate, it seems, wasn't done with Alcibiades, and neither were the Spartans. The audacious general had another trick up his sleeve, a bold maneuver even by his standards. But would it work? For more than 300 years, just the sight of a wall of scarlet cloaks and bronze shields was enough to force Sparta's adversaries to simply give up and run away. What was at the heart of this great society that allows it to prevail even when vastly outnumbered? To attempt to get a glimpse into the mind of the Spartan warrior, one can turn to some of the last vestiges of Spartan society, their poetry.
The significance of Tyrtaeus' poetry to the Spartans was great because he was a powerful poet. He raised the morale of the Spartans through his poetry. He became, in a way, the voice of Sparta.
It is shocking when an old man lies on the front line, an old warrior whose head is white and beard gray, exhaling his strong soul into the dust. An abominable vision, foul to see. But in a young man, all is beautiful when he still possesses the shining flower of lovely youth. Alive, he is adored by men, desired by women, and finest to look upon when he falls dead in the forward clash. Let each man spread his legs, rooting them in the ground, bite his teeth into his lips, and hold. This was the Spartan mindset that allowed a small, vastly outnumbered Greek city-state to enslave 250,000 people, strong-arm hostile neighbors into forming powerful alliances, and defeat the million-man Persian army. Now, near the end of the 5th century BC, Sparta was embroiled in the Peloponnesian War, fighting for control of its most powerful neighbor, the Athenian Empire. And for the first time in their history, Sparta was on the ropes.
Earlier battles had created heroes and created heroic values, but the Peloponnesian War destroyed heroes and destroyed these values. Cities were besieged, hostages were slaughtered, innocent people were butchered. It was the first modern war where the old niceties were ignored.
In order for Sparta to prevail in this new kind of war, they needed a larger, more powerful navy. In order to get that navy, Sparta needed something that it had never had before: money. For funding, the fledgling Spartan fleet turned to the only power that despised Athens more than Sparta did: Persia. Persia considers an alliance, but is dissuaded by its newest tactical advisor. He is none other than Alcibiades, the same man who had been Sparta's staunchest supporter for the previous 2 years.
He's always pushing the envelope. He is always doing that which is forbidden. And he's the kind of man who likes to sort of do a little dance around his own capacity to get away with what other human beings can't get away with.
With the ear of Tissaphernes, the Persian governor of Asia Minor, Alcibiades, the legendary Athenian turned Spartan, was now on his third side of a two-sided war.
Alcibiades has persuaded Tissaphernes that really what he should do is wear out both the Spartans and the Greeks by not giving the Spartans sufficient support. Let you and him fight, was the policy. A very clever policy for Persia.
However, the Spartans were able to collect funds from various interested governments and individuals in order to build their new navy. Meanwhile, Alcibiades continued to display some loyalty to Athens. and as a result was no longer trusted by Tissaphernes. Fearing arrest, Alcibiades left Persia, but only to rekindle his influence in Greece.
Alcibiades is staggeringly talented. He is a man who has got a brilliant education. He is charismatic. He's spectacularly wealthy. Everything he touches turns to gold, or at least for a while.
Alcibiades turned his charismatic touch once again to Athens, the same country from which he had been expelled 4 years before. In 411 BC, a handful of still loyal supporters appointed him once again as Athens' supreme military commander.
Aristophanes in the Frogs has a line that I translate this way about Alcibiades. They love him, they hate him, they cannot do without him.
And in the beginning of his now second time in power, Alcibiades seemed to be leading Athens to victory. Although Sparta now had a superior fleet, Athens tenaciously held on to its empire.
They just beat the Spartans time after time after time.
In fact, the Spartans didn't win a battle until Notium in 407 BC, when Sparta, under the leadership of Admiral Lysander, destroyed a great number of Athenian ships. But the real significance of the Battle of Notium is that it destroyed something more precious: Alcibiades' alliance with Athens.
Alcibiades is in command of the fleet at Notium, and for reasons that we simply don't know. He leaves the fleet in the hands not of another elected general, but of his own personal ship's steersman. That steersman gets tricked into giving battle to Lysander against Alcibiades' specific orders. The Athenians are defeated and almost finished off. So after that, Alcibiades can never come back to Athens again.
In 405 BC, Sparta was poised to decimate what remained of the once great Athenian navy. Lysander planned a final assault on the Athenian forces at Aigos Potamoi. In exile, Alcibiades learned of Lysander's plan and went to the front lines to warn his former Athenian friends.
When he was deposed, the Athenians went into the toilet, and then finally at the last gasp, he came back with the advice that would have saved them, which they ignored.
They refused to listen to him. We don't, after all, Alcibiades, you're not a terribly trustworthy character, which he was not. He was right in this case, however. The Athenians lose.
Alcibiades' luck had finally run out. The Athenian loss sent him into hiding, and in the process he was robbed of most of his money.
Alcibiades goes on to die rather ignominiously, probably as part of another love affair gone wrong, and is killed by irritable relatives of the girl.
He took enormous pleasure in his capacity to outwit people. And he outwitted himself in the end. But along the way, the path that he followed is simply extraordinary. I mean, there really is no other figure in Greek history who is quite as colorful and as interesting. And of course, in the end, it's fatal to him.
After their defeat at Aigos Potamoi, the people of Athens hid behind the walled city of Piraeus, and Lysander built a navy blockade across the entrance to the city's harbor.
The Athenians have lost their last fleet. They have lost the capacity to resupply the city. It's really only a matter of how many months can they hold out before they starve.
Athens fell in March of 404 BC. Lysander entered the city and took control of its government and its people. The 27-year Peloponnesian War was over.
People in Athens were petrified that the same thing that they had done to other cities during the course of the war, killing all the men, enslaving all the women and children, was about to be done to them.
There certainly was pressure from Thebes and Corinth, Sparta's most powerful allies, to burn Athens to the ground and enslave its population. But Sparta ultimately chose a different fate for Athens.
What was most significant about the way the Peloponnesian War ended is not that the Spartans, rather than the Athenians, won. It's that the Spartans chose not to destroy Athens. There were certainly people in Sparta who wanted to, and there were many Athenians who expected that this would happen.
Sparing Athens, however, was not done out of mercy, but out of political necessity.
The allies of Sparta really wanted the Athenians dead. But Lysander and the Spartans realized that by destroying Athens, they would create a power vacuum that would be filled by Thebes, with which the Spartans were already having trouble.
For Sparta, the question would be, if we don't destroy Athens, what will we do with it? The beginning of a new era in foreign policy will actually be the beginning of the end for Sparta. It was 404 BC. The 27-year-long Peloponnesian War was over, and so was the golden age of Athens.
The results of the Peloponnesian War is that an entire generation has learned nothing other than war. There's a whole generation who have not been able to invest their creative talent in architecture, literature, town planning. And so we see the great buildings on the Acropolis that are not finished. We see the gradual demise of great tragedy, and the great historians will be gone.
The Athenians also saw that Sparta was in control of their once great empire.
They take away the navy. They insist on breaking down places in the wall so that they're not defensible. There's no empire, there's no money, there's no fleet. They must become members of the Spartan alliance. They swear to have the same friends and enemies as the Spartans and follow them where they lead.
A new government was installed in Athens to essentially remake the democratic city-state into a mini Sparta.
Sparta made it its business to replace democracy everywhere it could with oligarchy. The Spartans thought that democratic regimes were too warlike, inspired too much popular enthusiasm, too disorderly, and too exposed to foreign ideas.
The terms of the peace that Sparta imposed upon Athens were that they should establish an oligarchic government, overseen by 30 pro-Spartan Athenians, and it came to be known as the 30 Tyrants.
The takeover of Athens was Sparta's first attempt at nation-building, and it was a dismal failure. Under the direction of Lysander, who was a far better admiral than diplomat, the so-called 30 Tyrants began a terror campaign against anti-Spartan forces inside Athens.
And they do terrible things. I mean, this is the worst internal civil war that Athens ever has. They kill something like 1,500 Athenians. It's an amazing number when you realize that the number of Athenian male adult members of the citizen class at that time might be around 25,000 people.
It was so bloodthirsty that the Athenian democratic exiles who marched back into Athens to retake their city had the support of the king of Sparta.
King Pausanias, who is now one of the kings in Sparta, is a traditionalist, very opposed to Lysander, very opposed to everything that's going on. And it's not too much to say that there is a conflict between kings.
Within several months, the victory over Athens had irrevocably divided Sparta, forced the rest of the Greek world to pick sides, and led to the mass murder of everyone in the middle.
The Peloponnesian War has taught people that you either have to look toward oligarchs or democrats for your safety, but men of moderation and men who try to bridge those political and economic differences wind up dead.
It was, in every sense of the word, a Pyrrhic victory, a war in which no one wins.
Athens lost the war, and it lost its empire. Never would they be as powerful again as they had been before the Peloponnesian War. The funny thing, though, is that although Sparta won the war, it too was devastated. It's very ironic that at the very moment of their victory, the Spartans are really laying the groundwork for their own collapse.
After the installation of an oligarchy in Athens, Lysander supported the takeover of as many other city-states as possible in the former Athenian Empire. Sparta quickly sets up 10 oligarchs in each of the Athenian allied states. Instead of being liberated, the people were indoctrinated into a system that had them wondering if they had been too hasty in rejecting Athenian rule.
You want to trade the Acropolis and Athenian democracy for Spartan barley bread and the agoge. No one wants to do that. You want to trade an Athenian drachma for a piece of Spartan lead. Nobody wants to do that.
And unlike the Athenians, they weren't great orators. They weren't able to project an ideal that the other Greeks could rally around.
The new Spartan leadership needed charisma to win over their new conquests, a quality sorely lacking in Spartan culture.
The fundamental weakness of that culture is the Spartans lack imagination. That's not prized at Sparta. They lack boldness, and they are not charming. They treat the other Greeks like dogs. And they do so because they think of themselves as being a breed apart, of being something absolutely superior to others.
There's a whole series of Spartan generals and leaders who go overseas and are brutal to the very people they're in charge of winning over. And what the Greek world has done is substitute an enlightened imperial master for sort of a brutal thuggery of inept Spartan commanders.
The type of discipline that they could impose on their own troops, that was one thing. But when they started imposing it on other people, they would make sailors would have to stand with iron anchors on their shoulders all day. That kind of thing didn't go over too big. People, they weren't too popular.
And here I think we have to go back to thinking about the training of a young Spartan. After all, who outside of your unit really matters? The world is a place to be exploited for the good of people who matter, and that's exactly the way they treat the Aegean. They act simply rapaciously in a way that pretty quickly has them involved fighting some of their own allies.
A brutal, imperialistic Sparta hell-bent on taking over the Greek world was not the reason why Sparta's allies fought for 27 years in the Peloponnesian War.
Sparta is ready to step in as the next great imperial power. This is shocking to Sparta's allies. The allies of Sparta had supposed that Sparta was going to be a liberator, was going to create a free Aegean, free of the imperial state, Athens. The Spartans don't see it that way. They see basically the opportunity to take just what they want.
The first city-state to successfully rebel against Spartan hegemony was the first that fell, Athens. In 403 BC, the Athenians returned to Piraeus and led a successful revolt against the 30 tyrants of Lysander.
Aristotle wrote that there is little point in creating a culture based solely on martial valor, because there is this thing, peace, with which one has periodically to deal. The Spartans didn't understand this. They could be counted on, once they had won the war, to lose the peace. A year didn't go by in the 4th century when the Spartans didn't manage to alienate someone who had once been their ally. They had an uncanny gift for this.
Sparta's fatal mistake in the years following the Peloponnesian War was underestimating the importance of keeping their allies happy.
No city-state in Greece, no matter how great its military prowess, could run the Greek world without the help of other allied states. They also had to worry about managing the 800-pound gorilla in their corner, Persia. Sparta had to figure out some way to keep these states as its friends. Instead, what Sparta does is alienate every last one of them. And that is a recipe for disaster.
In short order, Sparta managed to ignite the hatred of its two largest, and up until this point, loyal allies, Thebes and Corinth.
There is a breach very quickly between them and some of their allies who are too powerful just to ignore them.
Within a decade of their great victory, Sparta is again at war, and this time the invincible Spartan war machine would be broken beyond repair. Around 398 BC, the winds of change blasted into the Spartan capital. King Agis, who had supported and defended the new imperialistic vision of Sparta, died. His brother, Agesilaus, took over the Spartan throne.
King Agesilaus, who is an out-and-out imperialist who wants to dominate Greece proper, who wants to impose governments made up of his friends wherever he can, so alienates the Greeks, and most powerfully the Thebans, as practically to awaken a new Thebes in its hatred for Sparta.
Thebes had been a long-standing and steadfast Spartan ally. Located in the region known as Boeotia, Thebes was a geographically strategic ally during the Peloponnesian War, and Sparta used Thebes to conquer Athens. But unbeknownst to Sparta, Thebes used the war to become steadily stronger and wealthier.
Any wealth that is found in the countryside is carted off by the Thebans. Furthermore, in the course of the war, the Thebans begin to feel their oats as a military power.